It was a day that began like any other. A quiet morning filled with the soft, comforting sounds of a new life. Our daughter, just a month old, lay peacefully in her crib. The sunlight streamed through the windows of our apartment, casting a warm glow over the room. But as I looked down at her, a sinking feeling gripped my heart. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind me. Julian. His presence, once a source of comfort, now felt like an omen of something far darker. He stood there, a twisted smile on his face. "Luna," he said, his voice cold and venomous. "Why wasn't it you who died that day?" I froze, my blood running cold. "What are you talking about?" I stammered, my heart pounding in my chest. His eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, the malicious gleam in his gaze sending chills down my spine. "If you jump off this building, I'll spare the child." The words echoed in my mind, but I couldn't process them. My body went numb. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. Julian was serious. The reality of what he was suggesting struck me like a thunderclap, and I felt the room spin around me. He was threatening our daughter, using her as a pawn in his twisted game. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at my daughter, so innocent, so unaware of the danger surrounding her. In that moment, I made a choice. Desperate to save her, I nodded. "I'll do it. Just don't hurt her." But then, as I climbed to the edge of the rooftop, ready to sacrifice myself to save the life of the one person I loved more than anything, Julian's face twisted into a mask of sadistic pleasure. "Goodbye, Luna," he sneered. I barely had time to react before, in a cruel twist of fate, he threw our daughter off the edge. My heart stopped as I screamed in horror, reaching out, desperate to catch her, but my hands grasped nothing. I saw her small body falling, tumbling through the air, and then the sickening sound of her body hitting the ground. "Both you and this little wretch deserve to die," Julian shouted, his voice filled with an unholy satisfaction. I couldn't breathe. My heart shattered as I collapsed to my knees, choking on the sobs that tore through me. I had failed. I had lost everything. But just as I was about to succumb to the despair, something unexpected happened. My surroundings began to blur and fade. The world around me shifted, as if time itself was rewinding. I gasped, feeling as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer on the rooftop. I was back. Back to the day the cruise ship had crashed. Back to the moment when everything had started to unravel. My best friend, Juliet, was beside me, her voice excited. "Luna, Henry is here. Look at that body," she exclaimed, practically swooning. "His fingers are half the size of a steering wheel. This man is totally my type." I blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. I was disoriented, my mind struggling to process the change. But then it hit me, this wasn't just some random twist of fate. I had been reborn. I was back to the day the cruise ship had sunk, and everything. G was different. Juliet was still the same flirtatious, manipulative woman who had always been one step ahead in the game of love. She had set her sights on Henry, the president of our partner company, and she wasn't going to let anything stop her from getting what she wanted. She had even managed to get 2 tickets for the cruise ship, convinced that this would be her chance to seduce him. But I knew what would happen. I knew the danger that awaited us. The cruise ship was destined to sink, and Juliet, despite being an excellent swimmer, would not survive. She would refuse my help, believing that Henry would come to her rescue. But he wouldn't. And when the whirlpool sucked her under, she would panic, just as she had in my past life. And I would be left with the guilt of not having been able to save her. The pain of losing her had haunted me for years. But this time, I was determined to change things. To do things differently. To prevent the tragedy that would unfold. But what could I do? How could I stop history from repeating itself? As I watched Juliet flirt with Henry, my heart weighed heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. This was my chance, my second chance, to change everything. But would I be able to? It was surreal, almost impossible to believe that I had been reborn into the very day the cruise ship was scheduled to set sail. I stood there, in that moment, watching Juliet swoon over Henry, oblivious to the future that I already knew all too well. My mind raced as I tried to comprehend what this all meant. How was this happening? Why was I given a second chance? The cruel fate that had taken my daughter away from me now seemed to be giving me an opportunity to set things right. I could still hear Juliet's voice, high-pitched and breathy with excitement. "Luna, don't you think he's gorgeous?" "Oh, he's perfect." Juliet's eyes sparkled with mischief, her usual playful demeanor only serving to underscore the fact that she had no idea what was about to unfold. For me, the whole scene was nothing short of chilling. I remembered every detail of that night, the way Juliet had so carelessly tossed away the life buoys, believing Henry would come down to save her, only for the whirlpool to pull her under, sealing her fate. I could still hear her desperate screams for help as the water swallowed her whole. "Luna, why aren't you listening to me? I'm talking about Henry." Juliet's voice broke through my thoughts. I blinked, pulling myself out of the trance I had fallen into. "Yeah, I heard you." I smiled, though it felt stiff, unnatural. My mind wasn't here with her, not really. I was already back on that sinking cruise ship, reliving the painful memories of the past. The truth was, despite all the excitement Juliet felt about Henry, I wasn't fooled. I knew exactly what was happening behind the scene. Yes. I knew how this would play out. Juliet, in her usual self-centered fashion, had already set her sights on Henry, and she was determined to get him no matter the cost. I had seen this before, she was a master at getting what she wanted. I, on the other hand, had always been content to fade into the background, the quiet, supportive friend who never questioned Juliet's attention-grabbing ways. I had always believed she would come first in everything, and I had always been okay with that. But standing in front of her, a sense of clarity washed over me. I wasn't okay with it anymore. Not after everything I had been through. Not after losing my daughter. The ship was preparing to set sail, and I felt my heart race. The crew was bustling with preparations, the excitement of a luxury cruise in the air. But all I could feel was the weight of the impending disaster that loomed. The same disaster that had claimed Juliet's life in my previous life. The same disaster that would lead to Julian's betrayal, to the painful and devastating loss of my daughter, and the revelation of his true feelings. As I watched Juliet flirt with Henry, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settle in my chest. In my previous life, I had tried to warn Juliet, tried to force her to take the life buoys, but she had refused, too confident that Henry would save her. The guilt of not having been able to change her mind had haunted me for years. But now, things were different. Now, I had the power to change the course of events. I had the power to stop Juliet from making the same reckless mistake. The question was, would I? Could I stop her from following the same doomed path? I knew I had to. I couldn't afford to let history repeat itself. The stakes were too high. The memory of my daughter's life, her bright, innocent eyes staring up at me before she was ripped away, still haunted me, a constant reminder of what I stood to lose if I didn't act. The ship's engines roared to life, and the passengers began to board, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Everything felt so ordinary, so calm, and yet I knew the storm was coming. I could already feel it in my bones. I was on the cusp of something monumental, something that could change the course of my life, and Juliet's life, forever. But as I walked alongside Juliet toward the boarding gate, I couldn't help but wonder, was I strong enough to stop her? Could I face the heartache that would inevitably follow? The day stretched on, and with each passing minute, I could feel the tension building inside me. There was no going back now. I had to stop Juliet from making the same mistake that had led to her death. She had no idea what awaited her, no idea that the very decisions she was making now would lead to her tragic end. We reached the boarding gate, and I glanced around, watching the other passengers as they made their way on to the ship. But Juliet, as always, was oblivious to everything around her. She was too busy with Henry, too focused on the idea of winning him over. But something was different this time. I wasn't going to let her slip away this time. I wasn't going to let her take that fatal risk. Not again. The ship's departure was smooth, with nothing to suggest the chaos that was about to unfold. As the cruise ship made its way into open water, the crew went about their duties, and the guests settled in for what was supposed to be a relaxing, luxurious experience. Juliet had already found a way to get Henry alone, and I could see them talking from across the deck. She was laughing, her voice carrying over the sound of the waves, and Henry, despite his reserved tour, seemed completely charmed by her. It was the same old game, the same flirtatious act that Juliet had perfected over the years. But this time, I wasn't going to let it play out the way it had in the past. The ship had been out at sea for several hours when disaster struck. A loud crash echoed throughout the deck, followed by a violent lurch. The ship shuddered as the water around us began to churn. I froze. My heart raced as the memory of the sinking came flooding back. The ship was going down, just like it had in my previous life. But this time, I wouldn't let Juliet die. I immediately rushed to the lifeboats, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I needed to find Juliet. She had to be stopped. She couldn't make the same mistake again. I had to force her to take the life buoy to survive this time. I found her at the edge of the ship, just as I had in my previous life. Juliet was staring out at the water, completely unaware of the danger approaching. Her eyes were fixed on Henry, who was standing a few feet away, looking out at the horizon. Juliet. I called, my voice frantic. Get to the lifeboat. Now. She turned to me, a slight frown on her face. Luna, what are you talking about? Henry is here. He'll come down to save me. I don't need a life buoy. I'm fine. My heart sank as I watched her dismiss my words. She was doing it again. She was going to make the same mistake, believing that Henry would come to her rescue. But Henry was nowhere near the water. He was standing on the deck, too afraid to come down and help. I looked around, searching for a lifeguard, someone who could help. But the ship was in chaos, and the lifeboats were already being lowered. I had no time to waste. Juliet, please listen to me. You have to take the life buoy. It's the only way you'll survive, I pleaded. Henry won't save you. You need to help yourself. But she only shook her head, her expression one of disbelief. You don't understand. I'm not going to die. I'm going to be fine. Henry will save me. I knew it was hopeless. She wouldn't listen. She never had before, and she wasn't going to now. The water around us was churning violently, and I could feel the pull of the sinking ship's wreckage beneath us. I watched as Juliet, in her Aragon CE, dismissed my warning and pushed the life buoy away from her. It was happening again. My worst nightmare was coming true. The whirlpool appeared suddenly, as it had in my past life, a violent force that sucked everything in its path into the abyss. I watched in horror as Juliet was pulled under, her screams drowned out by the roar of the waves. I reached out, but it was too late. This time, I couldn't save her. The chaos that erupted around me felt like a nightmare, one that I had hoped ever to experience again. The ship's massive hull groaned under the pressure of the sinking, as panic spread like wildfire. Crew members shouted orders, trying desperately to keep control, but the damage was already done. The sea had claimed its first victim, and I couldn't believe my eyes as Juliet, who had always been the center of attention, the one who could charm anyone, had succumbed to her own recklessness. I stood frozen in place, the sound of her screams still echoing in my ears. The very scene I had tried so hard to prevent was unfolding right before me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Juliet's body was now caught in the whirlpool, her limbs flailing in a final, desperate attempt to survive. But it was too late. The water had already swallowed her whole. Juliet! I screamed, but it was useless. The roaring waters drowned out my voice. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched helplessly, my breath shallow and quick. In the past, I had blamed myself for her death, her refusal to take the life buoy, her belief that Henry would save her. But in this life, this time, I had done everything I could to stop it. And yet, here I was, watching history repeat itself. I turned away, my eyes brimming with tears, not just for Juliet but for the agony that this entire situation had caused me. I had tried to warn her, tried to convince her to take the life buoy, but it was as if fate was hellbent on repeating the same tragic outcome. There was nothing left to do now, except to brace myself for the aftermath. The air was thick with tension as the crew managed to get the lifeboats lowered. Passengers scrambled to get on them, their faces a mix of fear and confusion. It was chaos, pure and simple. People screamed, shoving and pulling, desperate to escape the sinking ship. But none of them knew what was really happening. What had just unfolded beneath the surface. The ship's fate was sealed, but I knew this was just the beginning for me. The moment I had feared Juliet's death, the event that had forever haunted my past, was over. But this time, I wouldn't let it break me. This time, I had a chance to change the outcome, to make things right. I had no choice but to push forward. I couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Juliet had made her choices, and now it was my turn to act. The lifeboat was still a few feet away, bobbing gently in the waves. I could see Henry on the deck, surrounded by frantic crew members, as they prepared to evacuate the passengers. My hands shook as I grabbed hold of the nearest life jacket and secured it tightly around my waist. The chaos around me continued to swirl, but I had no time to waste. I needed to get to safety. I needed to leave this nightmare behind. As I reached the lifeboat, the crew members worked quickly to get it launched. I saw passengers struggling to board, some of them injured, some of them barely able to comprehend what was happening. It was like a scene out of a disaster film, but this was real. This was happening right in front of me. I climbed into the lifeboat with a sense of urgency, but something held me back. I turned around, looking back at the wreckage of the ship. The waters were calm now, but the aftermath of what had just happened was sinking in. Juliet was gone. She had been swept away by the sea, and there was nothing I could do to change it. But deep inside, a fire burned, a need for justice, for revenge. Julian had not just betrayed me, he had destroyed my world. He had thrown our daughter to her death, and now, I was going to make him pay. I would make him feel every ounce of pain I had suffered. The lifeboat was slowly filled with passengers, and I could hear the hushed voices of those around me. But my mind was elsewhere. It was in that moment of solitude that the reality of the situation truly sank in. Juliet was dead. The ship was sinking. And Julian, he was out there somewhere, safe for now, but for how long? I would make sure he paid for what he had done. I would make sure he knew the depth of my pain. As the lifeboat drifted further away from the wreckage of the ship, I found myself staring out at the vast, endless ocean. The silence was deafening. It was a strange feeling, to be so far removed from the chaos, yet so close to the memory of the lives lost. I couldn't bring Juliet back. I couldn't undo the mistakes of the past. But I could make sure that Julian and those who had wronged me would never escape their own reckoning. I had been given a second chance at life, and this time, I would. Let it slip away. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the water. The calm of the evening contrasted sharply with the violent emotions still swirling inside me. I was no longer the passive observer of my own life. I had the power to make things right, to change my destiny. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. As the lifeboat moved toward the nearest rescue ship, I made a vow to myself, I would find Julian. I would confront him. I would make him face the consequences of his actions. No more running away. No more pretending that everything was okay. I would take control of my fate, and no one, not Julian, not anyone, would stand in my way. When I finally reached the rescue ship, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The events of the day had drained me, leaving me feeling hollow, but with a renewed sense of purpose. I couldn't afford to let the past define me. I couldn't afford to let Julian's betrayal control my future. The rescue workers moved quickly, helping passengers aboard and ensuring that everyone was accounted for. But my mind was still racing. I needed to find Julian. I needed to make him pay for what he had done, for what he had taken from me. The night was quiet, and as I sat in the crowded cabin of the rescue ship, my thoughts drifted back to that moment on the rooftop. Julian's cold smile, his cruel words, still echoed in my mind. But I would not let him win. I would not let him break me. I had been given a second chance, and I would use it wisely. Tomorrow, I would face him. Tomorrow, I would show Julian that I was not the same woman I had been before. I was stronger now, more determined, and I would do whatever it took to make him regret the day he crossed me. And as the rescue ship sailed toward the shore, I knew that I was ready. Ready to confront my past, ready to fight for my future, and ready to make Julian pay for his betrayal. This was just the beginning. The morning after the chaos was surreal. The sun had risen, but the world felt dimmer, as if the events of the previous day had drained all the light from it. The sea, now calm, seemed indifferent to the storm it had unleashed. I could still hear the roar of the waves in my mind, the screams of those who had perished, and above all, Juliet's face as she was swept away by the whirlpool. The guilt gnawed at me, but there was no time for regret now. I had already made my decision, and I couldn't afford to look back. The rescue ship was now docked at the nearest harbor, and the passengers were beginning to disembark, each of them silently processing the trauma of what had occurred. There were survivors, but none of us would ever be the same. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered my things, preparing to leave the ship. But the moment I stepped onto the pier, I saw him. Julian. His presence was enough to stop me in my tracks. He was standing at the end of the dock, looking lost, like a man who had seen his entire world crumble before him. But I knew better. I had lived through this before, and I knew exactly who he was. He wasn't here to mourn, to grieve the loss of his daughter, or to feel remorse for the betrayal he had inflicted on me. No, he was here because he had no other choice. He was here because he had nowhere else to go. And I was ready to make him pay. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and resolve. I had been through hell, and now it was time to turn the tables. As I made my way toward him, I could feel the weight of everything I had lost, everything I had endured, pushing me forward. The years of pain, the loss of my daughter, the crushing betrayal, none of it would go unpunished. Luna, Julian said, his voice hollow. He looked at me with that same cold, calculating gaze. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you'd be. Stop, I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. Don't act like you care. Don't even pretend. He flinched, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something, guilt, fear, maybe even regret, crossing his face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same arrogant indifference that had always defined him. You don't understand, Luna. This is bigger than you think. You don't know what I know exactly what you've done, Julian, I interrupted, Takin. A step closer. I know how you've destroyed everything. How you betrayed me, how you betrayed our daughter. And I'm done pretending that it's okay. You don't get to walk away from this. His eyes narrowed, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by me. You think you can just throw away everything we had? All the years we spent together? For what? To punish me? You don't even know what's going on, Luna. I could feel the rage rising in me, but I kept it contained. I needed to stay focused. I know exactly what's going on. You've been lying to me from the very start. You were never the person I thought you were. You were never the man who promised to love me, to protect me. You were a coward who didn't even hesitate to throw our daughter off a rooftop. And I'm done with you. The silence between us was heavy, thick with the weight of our shared history. I could see his jaw tightening. The muscles in his neck stiffening. He was angry now, but I could also see the fear in his eyes. He knew what I was capable of. He knew that I wasn't the naive, broken woman I had been before. You think I didn't suffer, Luna? Julian's voice was low, dangerous. You think I didn't feel anything when I had to make that decision? You think it was easy to do what I did? I took another step closer, my eyes never leaving his. You didn't make a decision, Julian. You made a choice. It was the wrong one. You killed our daughter. You betrayed me in the most unforgivable way possible. And now you want me to feel sorry for you? His expression faltered, but just for a second. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was replaced by that cold, detached look I had come to know all too well. You don't know anything. You don't know what it's like to be trapped in this life. To have no choice but to follow the path laid out for you. I don't need to know, Julian. I said, my voice steady. What I do know is that you made a choice, and now you have to live with it. He looked at me, his eyes hardening. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? You think you've got everything figured out. You've got your second chance at life, and you think you're some kind of martyr. But you don't know what it's like to be in my shoes. You don't know what it's like to lose everything. I do know, I whispered. I do know. Because I've lost everything, too. But the difference is, I'm not going to let you destroy me anymore. I'm not going to let you keep me chained to your lies. Julian's face twisted in anger, and for a moment, I saw the real him, the man who had been hiding behind a mask for so long. But it was too late for him. The truth was out now, and there was no escaping it. I turned away from him, my heart heavy with a sense of finality. I'm done, Julian. You can keep running, but I won't be a part of your life anymore. You've ruined it all, and there's nothing you can do to fix it. For a long moment, Julian didn't say anything. He stood there, watching me with a mixture of fury and disbelief. And then, as if realizing that he had lost, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. But as I watched him go, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't over yet. There was still work to be done, still revenge to be had. But for the first time, I felt like I had control. The darkness that had followed me for so long was beginning to fade, replaced by a fierce determination. The days that followed were a blur. The media coverage of the cruise ship disaster was relentless, the headlines filled with stories of the tragedy, the chaos, and the heroic rescue efforts. But no one knew the true story. No one knew what had really happened, what had led to Juliet's death, what had caused the ship to sink. The public was distracted by the drama, and in the midst of it, I was quietly planning. I wasn't going to let Julian get away with what he had done. And I wasn't going to let the world believe he was the victim in all of this. The truth needed to come out, and I was going to make sure it did. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies, people who could help me expose Julian for the monster he truly was. And I knew exactly where to start. The next few days were filled with meetings, phone calls, and quiet conversations with people who could help me bring Julian down. I had the resources now, the power to make things happen. I had been given a second chance, and this time, I wasn't going to let it slip away. Julian would pay for what he had done. He would regret the day he ever crossed me. The days after I confronted Julian were filled with a quiet, simmering anger that I barely kept under control. The adrenaline rush from Fasten him head-on had started to wear off, and in its place, there was a more methodical, cold approach. I was no longer that scared, naive woman who had blindly trusted him. I had seen his true face, and now it was time to use that knowledge to get what I wanted, justice. And Julian would not escape it. As the dust settled from the disaster, the world moved on. The media shifted its focus to other stories, and the victims, including Juliet, were soon forgotten. The cruise line began to release statements claiming that everything was under control, and those who had survived the shipwreck were praised for their bravery. But for me, the truth was far more complicated than any news outlet could portray. Julian had been the mastermind of the darkest tragedy in my life, and I would make sure that everyone knew. He could no longer hide behind the facade of a loving husband or a doting father. The truth would be out there, and I would make it my mission to ensure that everyone who had supported him would know exactly what kind of man he really was. It wasn't long before I started putting my plan into motion. I had made a few discreet phone calls, and soon I was meeting with a lawyer, someone who specialized in criminal cases and had a reputation for uncovering corruption. I wasn't about to trust just anyone with this, but this lawyer seemed different, sharp, strategic, and not easily intimidated. "Luna," she said, her voice calm and calculating as we sat across from each other in her office, the papers spread out before us. "You're asking for a lot, and this is not going to be easy. But you need to understand, once we start down this path, there's no turning back." I looked at her, my eyes hardening with resolve. "I'm not turning back," I said, my voice steady. "I've already lost everything once. I won't let him get away with it again." The lawyer nodded, sensing the weight of my words. "Then we'll need evidence, proof that Julian not only caused your daughter's death but also manipulated the situation to make it look like an accident. We'll need to show that he had motives and that he was complicit in the cover-up." I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine at the thought of revisiting the pain of that day. But I couldn't let myself falter. "Not now. I have proof. I know exactly what happened." The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "You're sure about this?" I leaned forward, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "I was there when he threw our daughter off the rooftop. I heard him say it. And I've been to the places he's tried to cover his tracks. There are documents, witnesses, and records. All of it." Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise with a professional calm. "This is big. You realize this could bring down a lot of people, right? Julian didn't act alone. He's connected, and the people around him will do anything to protect him. You'll be up against more than just him." I met her gaze and nodded again. "I know. But I can't let him keep getting away with this. Not after what he did to me, to my daughter." For the next few weeks, I was in a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and legal consultations. It was exhausting, but with each passing day, I felt more empowered. Julian might have thought he had one, but he was wrong. The walls were closing in on him, and he had no idea how deep my investigation had gone. The lawyer, though cautious, agreed to help me navigate the legal complexities of the case. She had connections, sources who were willing to speak out, and evidence that would be invaluable in exposing Julian's lies. But I wasn't relying solely on her. I had my own way of gathering information, and Julian had been careless. The more I dug into his life, the more I uncovered. The cracks in his carefully constructed life were beginning to show. One night, after returning home from yet another long day of meetings, I sat at my desk, reviewing the files that the lawyer had sent me. My phone buzzed on the table, and when I looked at it, my heart skipped a beat. It was a message from an anonymous number. "Julian's not who you think he is. He's been hiding something from you. Something dangerous. Don't trust anyone." My mind raced as I read the message again. I had no idea who it was from, but I couldn't ignore it. I had always suspected that Julian was hiding something far worse than what I had already uncovered. Could this message be the key to unraveling everything? I quickly dialed the lawyer's number, my fingers shaking with urgency. "I just got a message. Someone's warning me about Julian. I think there's more to this than we know." The lawyer's voice was sharp and focused. "What do you mean, more?" I explained the message, my voice low. "I think there's a deeper conspiracy. Someone is pulling the strings behind the scenes, and Julian is part of it. We need to dig further. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke. All right. We'll have to go deeper. I'll pull some strings on my end. This could be bigger than we thought. The next few days were a blur. The message had set everything in motion, and now the pieces were falling into place. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how far Julian had gone to protect his secrets. His connections, his network, none of it was what it seemed. People were lying to cover up for him, covering up his tracks to keep his empire intact. But what was he hiding? As I met with more people who had worked with Julian, old colleagues, and disgruntled employees, the truth slowly began to emerge. Julian had been involved in shady business deals, illegal transactions that had been swept under the rug. He was connected to powerful people who would stop at nothing to protect him. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, reviewing more documents, the phone rang again. It was the lawyer. Luna, I have something for you, she said, her voice tight with urgency. We found the link. Julian's been laundering money through a network of shell companies. It's all connected to his family's business. And there's more. He's been involved in multiple cover-ups of illegal activities, including the incident with the cruise ship. This goes deeper than we thought. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. How far does it go? The lawyer paused. It goes all the way to the top. Julian's connections are vast. He's been hiding behind a powerful network of businessmen and politicians. And the worst part is, there's a witness. Someone who knows everything. My heart raced. This was it. This was the break I needed. It all made sense now. Julian had always been the charming, sweet man who could manipulate anyone into believing his lies. But underneath, there was something darker. Something dangerous. He wasn't just a man who betrayed me, he was part of something much bigger. The next few weeks were filled with careful maneuvering. I met with the witness, an ex-employee who had worked closely with Julian. The man was nervous, scared, but he agreed to speak out. He had seen things. He had witnessed Julian's dealings firsthand. With his testimony, we finally had the leverage we needed to bring Julian down. It wasn't long before the legal team started to piece everything together. The evidence was overwhelming. Julian's empire was crumbling, his lies and deceit exposed for all to see. And then came the arrest. The day Julian was arrested, I stood outside the courthouse, watching as he was escorted in handcuffs. His face was pale, his eyes filled with disbelief. But I felt nothing for him. No sympathy, no pity. He had made his choices, and now he was going to pay for them. The moment of justice had arrived. Julian's empire was collapsing, and I had made sure that he would never hurt anyone again. As the trial began, I felt a sea of closure wash over me. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. Julian had finally been exposed for who he truly was. His actions had caused irreparable harm, but in the end, justice had prevailed. And as I stood in that courtroom, watching his life unravel, I knew that I had won. Not just for me, but for my daughter, for everything I had lost. This was my revenge. And I had made sure it was sweet. But as I walked out of the courthouse that day, the weight of the past still hung heavy on my shoulders. I had done what I set out to do, but in doing so, I realized something important. The real victory wasn't in Julian's downfall. It was in reclaiming my life. It was in taking back control of my own destiny. And with that newfound power, I knew that I could face whatever came next. Because this was my story now. And I would write it. The days following Julian's arrest were filled with a mixture of satisfaction and uneasy silence. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The weight that had settled on my chest after the tragic loss of my daughter, the betrayal, and the years of torment that had followed, was finally beginning to lift. It was as though I had shed a heavy cloak of anger and sorrow, leaving me lighter, freer, but also somewhat hollow. I was no longer haunted by the same nightmares that had tormented me for years. Julian's arrest had been a victory, but now, I found myself wondering if revenge, despite its sweet taste, had left an emptiness in its wake. What now? What did I do with this newfound freedom, this unburdened life? As Julian's trial progressed, I found myself becoming a witness to the unraveling of his carefully crafted facade. The media was relentless, the courtroom buzzing with every new piece of evidence. The more details came to light, the more I realized how much power he had accumulated over the years, how deep his web of lies went. He was no ordinary man. He had connections that spanned across politics, business, and criminal networks. To bring him down had taken more than just legal expertise, it had taken courage, persistence, and a lot of sleepless nights. Still, despite the mounting evidence, Julian fought back fiercely. He maintained his innocence, even as the walls closed in on him. His defense team was relentless, attempting to discredit the witness testimonies, to paint him as a victim of conspiracy. But there was no denying the truth. The lies had been exposed, and Julian's fate was sealed. I could see him now, the man who had once been the center of my life, now reduced to a mere shadow of himself. He looked broken, defeated, no longer the charming, manipulative figure I had once adored. But that didn't mean I felt sorry for him. Not anymore. I had shed any remnants of sympathy I might have had. He had made his choices, and now he had to pay the price. The trial dragged on, but each passing day brought me closer to the sense of closure I so desperately needed. As the final days of the trial neared, I was called to testify. It was the moment I had been preparing for. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood in the witness stand, the weight of the room pressing in on me. Julian sat across from me, his cold eyes locked on mine. He didn't say a word, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze, like he was trying to will me into silence. But I was done with silence. I spoke the truth, every word feeling like it was ripping open old wounds, but I didn't flinch. I recounted the night of the cruise, the betrayal, the lies, and the loss of my daughter. I told the court everything, leaving nothing out. When I finished, I felt a strange sense of liberation, as though I had been carrying a weight that I didn't even realize was there. As Julian's sentencing drew near, I began to reflect on everything that had happened. There were moments when I doubted myself, moments when I wondered if seeking revenge had been worth the toll it took on me. But then, I remembered my daughter's face, the innocence in her eyes before it was all ripped away. I remembered the countless nights I had spent in agony, blaming myself for things I couldn't control. No, revenge wasn't just sweet, it was necessary. It was the only way I could make peace with the past. But it wasn't just about Julian. This was about me. About reclaiming my life. About regaining my strength. For too long, I had been a passive observer in my own life. I had allowed others to dictate my fate. But no more. I was the one who had pulled myself out of the darkness. I was the one who had taken back control. And I would never let anyone take that from me again. The day of Julian's sentencing arrived, and I found myself standing outside the courthouse, waiting for the verdict. It felt almost surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. But this wasn't someone else's life. This was mine. This was the culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had endured. When the judge finally delivered the sentence, it was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Julian was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes, including the murder of our daughter, his involvement in money laundering, and his various other illegal activities. There was no more room for his lies, no more excuses. He had been exposed for what he truly was, and justice had been served. But as I stood there, listening to the verdict, I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected. Instead, a sense of finality washed over me. This was over. Julian was no longer a part of my life, but the scars he had left behind would never completely fade. In the weeks that followed, I found myself seeking peace. The legal battles were over, but the emotional toll was far from finished. I spent time alone, reflecting on everything that had happened. The world was still turning, but for me, everything had changed. I had faced my demons, fought back against the past, and emerged victorious. But the victory came with a price. I couldn't undo the pain Julian had caused. I couldn't bring back my daughter, no matter how much I wished I could. But I could move forward. I could rebuild. Slowly, I began to piece my life back together. The first step was reclaiming my career. I had put my job on hold during the trial, but now it was time to focus on my future. I had spent years supporting Julian, helping him climb higher and higher while I remained in his shadow. But now, it was time for me to shine. I reached out to former colleagues, and soon enough, I was back in the workforce. I didn't jump into anything too quickly. I needed time to adjust, to heal. But every day, I felt myself growing stronger. The new path I was on was one I had forged for myself, and it felt like a promise to my daughter, to the memory of what I had lost. Months passed, and the feeling of closure began to settle in. I had taken my revenge, and while the satisfaction of that didn't last as long as I had expected, the relief of finally letting go was overwhelming. I started to live again. I allowed myself to feel joy, to experience life without the constant shadow of Julian hanging over me. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I was stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. And in the quiet moments, when the world seemed to pause, I allowed myself to remember my daughter. To remember the love I had for her, and to honor her memory in the way that I lived my life. I would never forget her, and I would never stop fighting for justice. But now, I had peace. And so, I began a new chapter. One where I would no longer be defined by the betrayal and pain of the past. I would write my own story, and this time, I would be the one in control. Because in the end, I had learned the most important lesson of all: the past doesn't define you. It's how you rise from it that truly matters. The air was different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating weight that had haunted me for so long. The past was still there, lingering at the back of my mind, but I had learned to live with it, to breathe through it. I had survived. And not just that, I had come out stronger. The chains that had once held me were finally broken, and I was free to move forward. Every day felt like a new opportunity. Each morning, when I woke up, I reminded myself of what I had achieved in just the justice I had fought for, but the courage I had found in myself. I wasn't the same person I had been a year ago, or even 6 months ago. I was more confident now, more self-assured. The life I had rebuilt from the wreckage of my past was mine, and I was going to protect it with everything I had. But even in the calm, the memories of my daughter were never far from my thoughts. I thought of her constantly, her smile, her laughter, her innocence. I had lost so much, but in my heart, I still carried her with me. I had always thought that revenge would heal the wounds, but I had learned that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. As time passed, I threw myself into my work. It was a fresh start, a new chapter in a life that had been filled with too many dark pages. I had become more than just a survivor of my circumstances, I had become a force of my own. I knew what I wanted, and I wasn't afraid to go after it. I found fulfillment in my career again. I poured my energy into projects, working with people who valued my expertise and skills. For the first time in a long while, I was praised for my work, and it felt good to be recognized for my talent, not just my past. I had spent so many years in Julian's shadow, supporting his ambitions, that I had forgotten what it felt like to live for myself. But now, I was finally living for me. The satisfaction I got from working was not just about professional success, it was personal. It was a quiet rebellion against the person I had been in Julian's world. No longer was I defined by my relationships or by my past. I was carving out my own identity, one that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. One afternoon, as I sat in my office reviewing documents, a knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I looked up, surprised to see a familiar face standing in the doorway. "Lewin." The voice said softly. "I've been trying to reach you." It was Henry. The same Henry who had been a part of my past, the one who had once been the object of Juliet's obsession. But he wasn't here for her. He was here for me. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Seeing him again stirred something deep inside me, something I wasn't quite ready to confront. But I couldn't ignore the fact that he had always been kind to me, especially in the days after the accident, when I had been struggling to make sense of everything. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I thought you had more important things to do." Henry gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. I did. But this couldn't wait. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, his gaze never leaving mine. "Luna, I know things haven't been easy for you. And I know the last time we saw each other, it was under very different circumstances. But I need to tell you something." I raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Henry took a deep breath before speaking, his voice steady but laced with sincerity. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. And I realized that I was wrong. You were always there for me, even when things were complicated. And I want to make things right." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" Henry paused, collecting his thoughts. "When everything happened, when the ship sank, when Juliet died, I didn't know what to do. I was lost, and I didn't understand what was happening. But now, looking back, I see that I wasn't there for you when you needed me the most." I was silent for a moment, processing his words. I had never expected Henry to come back into my life after all that had happened. But now, standing in front of me, he seemed genuinely remorseful. The truth was, I wasn't sure how to feel. I had spent so much time focusing on what Julian had done to me that I had never really stopped to think about what Henry's role in it had been. He had been part of the disaster, yes, but he had also been the one to reach out to me when I needed support. "I don't need you to fix anything, Henry," I said quietly, my voice trembling slightly. "I've learned to do that on my own." He nodded, his expression softening. "I know you have. But I think it's time I stop running from my past, too. I owe you an apology for everything that happened, for not being there for you when you needed me. For a long time, I didn't say anything. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, to remind him that I had already moved on. But the other part of me understood that he was trying to make amends. And for the first time in a long while, I realized that I wasn't the only one who had been broken by what had happened. It's your fault, I finally said. You didn't do anything wrong. But I think we both know that we can't change the past. All we can do is move forward. Henry nodded, his face filled with gratitude. I just wanted to make sure you knew that. For a brief moment, our eyes locked, and something passed between us. It wasn't love. It wasn't even affection, really. It was understanding, an acknowledgement that we had both been through something horrible, something that had shaped us in ways we couldn't fully comprehend. You've got to live your life, Luna, Henry said softly, his voice steady. And I have to do the same. I nodded, giving him a small smile. I will. As Henry turned to leave, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. There were no more loose ends. No more past mistakes I needed to fix. My life was mine again, and I had the power to shape it however I saw fit. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a rhythm I could manage. The scars of the past would always remain, but they no longer defined me. I had learned how to live with them, how to accept them without letting them control me. My career flourished, and I started to make plans for the future, plans that didn't involve Julian or anyone else from my past. And then, one day, I received a letter. It wasn't from the lawyer or from anyone connected to the trial. It was from someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. It was from my daughter. The letter, though simple, contained the words I had been longing to hear for years. I'm proud of you, Mom. You are strong. Don't ever forget that. As I read the letter over and over again, I realized that the real victory wasn't in punishing Julian. It wasn't in exposing his lies or watching him crumble. The real victory was in finding my own strength, in becoming the person I was meant to be, not defined by my past but empowered by it. I had started this journey seeking revenge. But in the end, I found something even more valuable, peace. And that peace was all I needed to move forward. Because the truth was, I had already won. It had been nearly a year since Julian's arrest. The world had moved on, as it always did. The trial, the media frenzy, and all the attention that had once consumed my life were now distant memories. The courtroom drama was behind me, and the echoes of my past were becoming quieter, fading into the background. But even in the peace I had fought so hard for, I couldn't help but feel that there was one last chapter left to write. I had found my new rhythm, a life built on the ashes of everything I had lost. My work, my home, my friends, everything felt right. It was as if the universe had given me a second chance to truly live, and I was taking it with both hands. But then, just when I thought I had everything under control, something happened that shook me to my core. It was a rainy afternoon when I received the letter. The envelope was unmarked, plain and simple, with no return address. My fingers hesitated over the paper, unsure whether to open it. The handwriting on the front teeth seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. Something about it felt unsettling, as though it was dredging up memories I wasn't ready to confront. But curiosity won out, and I tore it open. The letter was short but piercing. Luna, I'm sorry for everything. What I did to you, to your daughter, it was unforgivable. I've been trying to find a way to make things right, but I don't think there's anything I can do to erase the damage. I know you won't forgive me, and I wouldn't ask for that. But there's something you need to know. The truth about what happened that day, the day of the cruise ship accident. There's more to the story. And you deserve to know the whole truth. Meet me where it all began. You know where. If you want answers, come alone. My breath caught in my throat as I read the last sentence again. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Meet me where it all began. The cruise ship. The place where everything had spiraled out of control. The place where I had lost my daughter, where my life had shattered in 1,000 pieces. I sat there for a long time, the letter clutched tightly in my hands, my mind racing. Why now? Why after all this time? What more could Julian have possibly done? I had already heard all the lies, seen through the deceit, and fought for justice. What could be left? But a part of me, the part that had always sought the truth, felt a gnawing curiosity. Could this be the closure I had been seeking all this time? Or was this just another manipulation, another trap set by Julian's twisted mind? I didn't know the answer, but I knew one thing: I couldn't ignore it. The rain was still pouring down as I made my way to the harbor. The familiar, salty air that once filled me with dread now felt different. The place where everything had started, where my life had unraveled, had become nothing more than a distant memory. Yet, as I walked along the empty pier, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change again. I arrived at the spot where the cruise ship had once docked, now abandoned and quiet. The place that had once been a symbol of tragedy was now eerily still. The lights from the nearby buildings flickered dimly in the distance, casting long shadows on the water. I waited. Minutes passed, then an hour, but no one came. I was about to leave when I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned quickly. The figure in the distance was shrouded in darkness, but I could tell who it was the moment he stepped into the light. Julian. His face was gaunt, his expression tired and worn. He looked like a man who had spent far too much time fighting battles he couldn't win. But there was something in his eyes, something different. There was no arrogance, no bravado, just a deep sadness. It was the first time in a long while that I felt a pang of sympathy for him. "Luna," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "I never expected you to come." I didn't speak. Instead, I simply stood there, watching him, waiting for him to explain himself. "I know you've moved on," he continued, his gaze never leaving mine. "I know I don't deserve any of your attention, but there are things you need to hear. Things I never told you. Things that could change everything you think you know about that day, about Juliet, and about me." My mind was racing. Was this just another one of his manipulations? Was he trying to twist the story again, to make me believe that he was somehow the victim? But there was something in his voice that made me hesitate. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or hatred toward him. I felt uncertainty. "I'm listening," I said, my voice steady, but inside I was screaming, demanding the truth. He took a deep breath and stepped closer, his eyes darkening as he spoke. "The truth is, I never meant for it to go this far. You know about the money laundering, the connections, the lies, but what you don't know is why I did it. Why I turned my back on you, why I betrayed you, why I killed our daughter." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I had heard it all before, but hearing him say it so matter-of-factly, without emotion, made my blood run cold. "I didn't mean to kill her," he whispered, his voice cracking for the first time. But I had no choice. The pressure was too much. And when it all came crashing down, when the ship sank, I panicked. I couldn't let anyone find out what I had done, that I had been using you, using our daughter as leverage. And so, I made the decision. I shook my head, refusing to believe the words. You're lying. You chose to kill her. You threw her away like she didn't matter. Julian's eyes filled with pain. You don't understand. I wasn't just trying to save myself. I was protecting you, too. I thought that if I killed her, you'd be free of everything, of me, of the people I was involved with. You'd have a chance to live. I took a step back, my heart pounding. You thought killing our daughter was the answer? His expression twisted in anguish. I know it's hard to understand. But you never saw the world I was living in. I was drowning, Luna. I thought if I could just get out of it, if I could just, I don't know, escape it all, you'd be safe. I turned away, fighting the tears that threatened to rise. You ruined everything. You took her away from me. And now you want me to feel sorry for you? No, Julian said urgently. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But there's something else, something that happened that day. It wasn't just an accident. Juliet, she wasn't the person you thought she was. She was involved in everything. She knew about the money laundering, about the crimes I committed. She was going to expose me, Luna. She was going to bring it all down. I had no choice but to. His words trailed off, and for a moment, there was silence between us. I couldn't process everything he was saying. It was too much. Too many lies, too many secrets, too much pain. Everything that had happened, everything I had believed, was being shattered before my eyes. Julian was not the man I had once loved. He wasn't the man I had hoped he could be. And yet, as I looked at him now, there was no triumph in me, no satisfaction. Only the deep, undeniable truth that the man I had known was gone, replaced by a shadow of guilt and regret. I turned away from him, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't need your truth, Julian. I don't need your excuses. What's done is done. And no matter how much you try to explain it, you can never take back what you've done. As I walked away, I heard him call my name once more. But I didn't turn back. I had already made my peace with the past. Julian had lost everything, and now it was my turn to move on. And so, with every step I took, I left behind the ghosts of the past. I had taken back my life, and I would never allow anyone to take it from me again. The future was uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. Whatever came next, I knew I could handle it. I had survived the worst. And now, for the first time in years, I was truly free. The journey was mine to finish. And this time, I would write my own ending. It was a crisp morning when I stood at the edge of a new chapter, a place that felt both unfamiliar and strangely welcoming. The world was moving around me, but I was no longer bound by the chains of my past. Julian, his lies, and his betrayal had all been washed away in a torrent of truth, and though the scars would never fully heal, I had learned how to live with them. The pain, the grief, and the anger were no longer the rulers of my life. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was free. And yet, freedom didn't come without its challenges. The weight of everything I had been through still clung to me like a shadow, but I was no longer afraid of it. I was learning to live without fear, to live for myself. The past had tried to define me, but it had failed. And now, the future, bright, uncertain, and full of possibilities, was mine to create. I had begun working with the Henry Group full-time, finding a new sense of purpose in my work. The fast-paced, high-pressure environment had become my sanctuary. Each day was filled with new challenges, but with each challenge, I grew stronger. I had come a long way from the woman who had been dependent on Julian's approval. Now, I was standing tall on my own, carving out a path that was entirely mine. Henry was a constant presence, and as time passed, I found myself drawn to him in ways I hadn't expected. He had been there for me in the darkest moments, but I never allowed myself to see him as more than a friend, someone who had shared the burden of my grief. But with each passing day, my feelings for him deepened. He wasn't perfect, but he was real, and more than that, he was kind. He didn't try to fix me, he simply accepted me for who I was. And for someone who had spent so much of her life trying to be something she wasn't, that was more than I could ever have hoped for. Still, I hesitated. The scars from my past were still fresh, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to open my heart again. But there was something about Henry, something that made me feel safe, something that made me believe in the possibility of happiness once more. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing: I was no longer the same woman I had been before. The woman who had been broken by betrayal and loss. I was stronger now, more resilient. And I had a feeling that whatever the future held, I would be ready for it. But just as I was beginning to settle into this new rhythm, a familiar face from my past reappeared. It was Juliet. I had heard whispers of her return. She had resurfaced, her name once again in the tabloids, but I had no intention of involving myself in her drama. She was no longer a part of my life. Or so I thought. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I saw her standing outside the building, waiting for me. Her face, once so full of confidence and charm, now appeared worn, withered by time and regret. She looked older than I remembered, as though life had taken its toll on her. "Lewin." She said softly when I approached, her voice almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" I didn't speak at first. What did she want from me now? After everything, after the lies, the betrayals, the tragedy she had caused, why should I listen to her? But there was something in her eyes, something that hinted at desperation, at a plea for redemption. "Why now?" I asked coldly, my arms crossing in front of me. "After everything you've done to me, to my daughter?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability in her that I had never noticed before. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I can't change what happened. I know I can't bring back what I took from you, but I need you to understand. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was wrong. I was selfish, and I hurt you in ways I can never undo." I studied her for a moment, unsure of what to feel. Juliet had always been the one who manipulated, who played everyone around her. She had been the perfect picture of beauty and charm, using her looks to get what she wanted. But now, she looked different. She wasn't the woman I remembered. She was a shadow of her former self. "Why now, Juliet?" I repeated, my voice calmer but still tinged with anger. "Why should I believe anything you say? After everything you've done, after the pain you've caused, why should I listen to you?" I had heard whispers of her return. She had resurfaced, her name once again in the tabloids, but I had no intention of involving myself in her drama. She was no longer a part of my life. Or so I thought. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I saw her standing outside the building, waiting for me. Her face, once so full of confidence and charm, now appeared worn, withered by time and regret. She looked older than I remembered, as though life had taken its toll on her. Lewin. She said softly when I approached, her voice almost hesitant. Can we talk? I didn't speak at first. What did she want from me now? After everything, after the lies, the betrayals, the tragedy she had caused, why should I listen to her? But there was something in her eyes, something that hinted at desperation, at a plea for redemption. Why now? I asked coldly, my arms crossing in front of me. After everything you've done to me, to my daughter? Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability in her that I had never noticed before. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I know I can't change what happened. I know I can't bring back what I took from you, but I need you to understand. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was wrong. I was selfish, and I hurt you in ways I can never undo. I studied her for a moment, unsure of what to feel. Juliet had always been the one who manipulated, who played everyone around her. She had been the perfect picture of beauty and charm, using her looks to get what she wanted. But now, she looked different. She wasn't the woman I remembered. She was a shadow of her former self. Why now, Juliet? I repeated, my voice calmer but still tinged with anger. Why should I believe anything you say? After everything you've done, after the pain you've caused, why should I listen to you? That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything Juliet had said. The anger I had felt toward her over the years was still there, lingering in the back of my mind. But something had shifted. I had allowed her to see my pain, to acknowledge the damage she had done, and that in itself had felt like a victory. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. The wound she had left was too deep, too raw. But in that moment, I understood something important. I didn't need her forgiveness to move on. I had already found peace without it. I had found a way to live again, without the bitterness and hatred that had once consumed me. And with that realization, I finally allowed myself to believe that I could move forward. Not for Julian. Not for Juliet. But for me. The future was mine to embrace, and nothing, no one, could take that from me. The next day, I met with Henry. We talked about everything, about the past and the future, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of calm. No more secrets. No more running. Just honesty. And in his eyes, I saw the acceptance I had been searching for all along. I'm ready, I told him. I'm ready to move forward. For real this time. And as we sat there together, hand in hand, I knew that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but it was one I would face with strength, love, and a new sense of purpose. Because the past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. The future was mine to create. The sun was set in. As I walked along the quiet streets, the soft glow of the evening sky reflecting the peace I was finally beginning to feel. Life had come full circle, and as I turned the corner, I realized I was no longer just surviving, I was living. I had found strength in my career, in the relationships I had built, and in the peace I had cultivated. I no longer feared what the future held. I was ready to embrace it, fully and without reservation. My relationship with Henry had grown deeper over time. We had shared many moments of silence, understanding, and laughter. There was a calmness in his presence that soothed my soul. He wasn't perfect, but neither was I. And somehow, that made it easier to trust him. We built our connection. slowly, carefully, understanding the depth of each other's scars. It wasn't about fixing one another, it was about accepting each other as we were, flaws and all. One evening, as we sat together on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Henry took my hand in his voice steady but filled with an emotion I hadn't expected. "Luna, I've been thinking a lot about us. About what we've been through, about where we're headed." He paused, looking at me with intensity. "I don't want to rush anything. But I need you to know something. You mean more to me than I've ever told you." I felt a flutter in my chest. I had never been one to rush into relationships, especially after everything I had been through. But with Henry, everything felt different. We had both carried the weight of our pasts, and together, we had found a way to heal. "I feel the same way, Henry," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been through so much. But with you, I feel like I'm finally finding my way again." He smiled softly, and for a moment, we just sat there in silence, the only sound the soft rustling of the wind and the distant hum of the city. I felt at peace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about now. About us. And about the future. But life, as it often does, had more twists in store. A few weeks later, as I was leaving work, I received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in years. "Luna, it's me. Julian." The name sent a chill through me. I hadn't thought about him in months, not in any significant way. He had been locked away in his prison cell, and I had moved on with my life. But now, hearing his voice again, I realized just how much I had buried. "What do you want, Julian?" I asked, my voice cold, guarded. "I need to see you," he said. "There are things I need to say to you. Things I should have said before." I felt a mixture of emotions, anger, confusion, and curiosity. What could he possibly have left to say? Hadn't he already said everything that mattered? He had betrayed me, taken my daughter's life, and crushed everything I had worked for. There was nothing left for him to say. "I don't owe you anything," I said firmly. "You've said enough. You've done enough." "Oof." "I know," he replied, his voice full of regret. "I don't expect forgiveness. I never did. But this is about more than that. I need you to understand something. The truth about everything." My heart raced. I had heard enough lies from Julian to last a lifetime. But part of me, despite all that had happened, was curious. Was there something I had missed? Something that could finally give me the closure I had been looking for? "I'm not interested in your version of the truth, Julian," I said, trying to keep my composure. "Whatever it is, it's too late. It's over." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, he spoke again. "I just want to make sure you know everything before I'm gone for good." Gone for good? The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of unease. What was he trying to tell me? What was he planning? "Meet me," he continued. "One last time. Please." I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing, torn between wanting to close the door on him forever and the nagging curiosity that wouldn't let go. What did he mean by gone for good? Was he confessing to something even darker than I had imagined? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I made up my mind. "I'll meet you," I said, my voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But this is the last time. I want nothing more to do with you after this." The next day, I found myself standing outside an old, run-down cafe, a place that, years ago, had been a symbol of simpler times. A time before the betrayal, before the tragedy, when things had been good. But now, it was just a reminder of what had been lost. Julian was sitting at a table in the corner, his face drawn and tired. He looked like a man who had seen the end of everything, like someone who had been swallowed by the very darkness he had created. When he saw me, he stood up, his movements slow, as if the weight of the years had taken their toll on him. "Luna," he said quietly. "Thank you for coming." I didn't reply. I just sat down across from him, my eyes fixed on him, waiting for whatever he had to say. "I don't know if I can ever make up for what I've done," he began, his voice hoarse. "I know that what I did to you and our daughter is unforgivable. I can never undo the pain I caused. But I need you to understand that I wasn't just a victim of my own choices. I was controlled by forces greater than me. People I couldn't escape from." I narrowed my eyes. "What are you talking about?" Julian looked down at his hands, his face haunted by something I couldn't quite understand. "The money laundering, the deals I made, it wasn't just about greed. There were people involved. Dangerous people. They forced me into it. They threatened you. They threatened my life, my family. I thought I was protecting you by doing what they wanted. But in the end, I only destroyed everything I cared about." My heart pounded in my chest. Was this his way of trying to absolve himself? Was he trying to blame someone else for what he had done? "You're telling me you did all of this because you were threatened?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with disbelief. "You killed our daughter, Julian. You destroyed my life. And now you expect me to feel sorry for you?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for it to happen. I never meant for her to die. But I couldn't see any way out. I thought if I did what they wanted, if I followed their instructions, maybe I could save us both. But I was wrong. I was a coward." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I was silent. Could I believe him? Was this some last-ditch effort to make me feel guilty for his actions? "You're right," I said after a long pause. "You were a coward. And your cowardice cost me everything. You cost me my daughter." Tears filled Julian's eyes, and he reached out as if to touch my hand, but I pulled it back. I didn't want his touch. Not anymore. "I'm sorry, Lewin." He whispered. "I'm so sorry." I stood up, my heart heavy but resolute. "Sorry isn't enough. You can't fix this, Julian. And I won't let you destroy my peace any longer." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving him behind. I didn't look back. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't think about Julian much after that meeting. The closure I had sought wasn't in his words, it was in my own actions, my own decision to move forward. Julian had played his part in my past, but he no longer had a place in my future. And as I continued on this new path, I realized something important. The true strength came not from holding on to the past, but from letting it go. Only by releasing it could I finally embrace the life that awaited me. I had learned that the power to heal, to move forward, and to build a new life was always in my hands. It had always been. The only thing left was to trust in myself. And as I stood on the edge of the future, I knew one thing for sure, I was ready to live it. The air was cool as I stepped out onto the balcony that evening, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. It was moments like these when I could feel the weight of everything I had been through. I had walked through hell, fought again, and see the storms that tried to break me, and yet, I was still standing. I had learned that peace doesn't come from the outside world, it comes from within. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my life. I had spent so long being driven by anger, by the need for revenge, by the desire for justice. But now, it was different. I was no longer waiting for something to change or for someone to save me. I had saved myself. And with each day, I was becoming stronger, more confident, more whole. But even with all the progress I had made, there was a lingering question that I couldn't shake. What was next? What did the future hold for me? For Henry and me? It had been months since Julian's confession, and though I had found a certain peace in letting go of the past, there was still a part of me that couldn't fully escape the remnants of what he had done. The damage was irreversible, the scars would always remain, but my heart had learned to heal in ways I hadn't expected. Henry had been there for me through it all, patiently waiting for me to find my way. He never pushed, never rushed, just stood by my side. It was a love born out of understanding, of two broken people finding strength in each other. And now, as I stood at this crossroads, I wondered if I was ready to give my heart fully again. Could I trust myself with love? Could I trust him? The answer didn't come easily. Henry was a man who had his own past, his own scars. He had lost someone dear to him, and in his eyes, I saw a reflection of my own struggles. But there was something more in his gaze, something that made me believe that we were both capable of moving beyond our pasts. Together. But could we build a future, or was I still running from something? I asked myself that question day and night, wrestling with the thoughts that lingered in my mind. One evening, after a particularly busy day at work, Henry invited me out for a quiet dinner. We sat at a small, intimate restaurant. The dim lights casting soft shadows on the table. It was one of those moments that felt almost too perfect, too calm. And yet, the question I had been avoiding for so long was finally bubbling to the surface. As the waiter brought our food, I looked at Henry, my heart racing. "Henry," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to say." He looked up from his plate, his gaze steady. "What is it, Luna?" "I don't know if I'm ready for this," I whispered, my voice soft. "I don't know if I'm ready for us. I've been through so much, and I don't know if I can trust again. I'm scared." His eyes softened, and he placed his fork down. "Luna, you don't have to be scared. We don't need to rush anything. I'm here for you, no matter what. You don't have to have all the answers right now." I shook my head, frustration welling up inside me. But what if I never have the answers? What if I can't be the person you want me to be? "You already are," he said simply, his voice warm. "You don't need to be anything other than who you are. And who you are is someone who has been through more than most people could even imagine. But you've survived, Luna. You're stronger than you think. And I love you for it." The words hit me like a wave. He loved me. Even with all my flaws, all the baggage I carried, he loved me. And in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to have everything figured out. I just needed to be me. That night, after we finished dinner, we took a walk along the riverside, the sound of the water softly crashing against the shore. It was a peaceful walk, one that felt almost sacred. The cool breeze carried away the last remnants of my doubts, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I've been thinking about everything, I said, stopping to look out over the water. About us, about the future. And I think I'm ready. Henry stopped beside me, his hand brushing against mine. Ready for what? Ready to take the next step, I said, my voice steady now, full of resolve. Ready to let go of the past, completely. To be with you. To build something real. His eyes lit up, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said, Tenin. To face him, my heart racing. I've spent so long running, holding on to the past, trying to make sense of everything. But I've learned that I can't change what happened. All I can do is move forward. And I want to move forward with you. He stepped closer, taking my hands in his touch gentle but firm. Then let's do it. Together. In that moment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't bound by the chains of my past. I was free. Free to love. Free to live. The weeks that followed were filled with new beginnings. Henry and I grew closer, our bond growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't always easy. We still had our moments of doubt, still had to work through our fears. But we did it together, supportin' each other in ways I had never imagined. I focused on my career, pouring my energy into my work with the Henry Group. It was challenging, rewarding, and it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I was missing. For the first time, I felt truly fulfilled. My future wasn't dictated by what I had lost, it was being shaped by what I had gained. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm. The shadows of my past never fully disappeared, but they no longer had a hold on me. I had taken control of my destiny. The future was no longer something I feared, it was something I embraced. And in that future, I saw Henry beside me. Not as someone I was clinging to for comfort, but as an equal, someone who had stood by me through everything. Together, we were building something beautiful, something real. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of our apartment, watching the sunset, Henry turned to me, his eyes filled with a tenderness I hadn't expected. Lewin. He said softly, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. I looked at him, my heart racing. What is it? He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made my heart flutter. Will you marry me? I stared at him for a moment, the weight of the question sinking in. I had spent so long running from the past, so long avoiding the idea of love. But now, standing here, with him, I realized something important. I was ready. I was ready to embrace love again, to build a future with him. Yes, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. Yes, I will. And in that moment, I knew that everything I had been through, all the pain and the heartbreak, had led me here, to this beautiful, imperfect, wonderful life. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk. And for the first time, I was not afraid. The wedding was a dream. It was simple, but to me, it was perfect. Henry and I had carefully planned every detail, but what made it extraordinary was the feeling that accompanied it. The day was about us, our love, our journey, and everything we had overcome together. As I walked down the aisle, the weight of everything that had happened seemed to lift from my shoulders. I wasn't walking toward the past anymore, I was walking toward the future. Henry stood at the altar, waiting for me, his expression a mix of love and anticipation. He had been with me through every storm, and now, as I took my place beside him, I realized that we had finally reached a moment of peace. a moment where we could truly begin our new life. As the ceremony unfolded, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had brought us here. The pain, the loss, the betrayals, they had all shaped me, yes. But they no longer defined me. I had found my strength, my purpose, and my peace. And now, I was standing at the threshold of a new chapter with Henry by my side, a man who had shown me what love, patience, and understanding truly meant. After the wedding, we spent our honeymoon in a quiet, secluded beach town, far from the noise and distractions of the world. It was the perfect escape, just the two of us, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the simplicity of each other's company. We talked about everything and nothing. We laughed, we cried, and we simply enjoyed being in each other's presence. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the beach, Henry took my hand, his fingers entwined with mine. The sky was pain. Ted with hues of pink and orange, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing. "I'm glad we're here," Henry said quietly, looking out at the horizon. "It feels like we've come so far, Luna." I nodded, my heart full. "We have. And we're just getting started." He smiled at me, a soft, genuine smile. "I don't think I could have ever imagined this life, this peace, before I met you. You've changed everything for me." I turned to face him, my eyes searching his. "You've get everything for me, too, Henry. I've spent so long fighting against the past, holding on to grudges and pain. But with you, I've learned to let go. I've learned that the future is what we make of it." He reached up to gently cup my face, his thumb brushing away a stray tear that had fallen. "And we're going to make it beautiful, Luna. Together." As we returned home, everything began to fall into place. The Henry Group had expanded its operations, and I was promoted to a more prominent position, overseeing several key projects. It was a testament to how far I had come, how much I had grown. And yet, no matter how successful I became, I always remembered the lessons I had learned along the way. I never let my work define me completely. I knew what was important, and that was my family, my peace, and my happiness. Henry and I built a life together, brick by brick. We supported each other in everything we did, and the love that had once felt so fragile and uncertain grew stronger with each passing day. We weren't perfect, but we were perfect for each other. And that was enough. A year later, we found ourselves in a new home, one that felt like a true reflection of us. It was cozy, filled with warmth and light, and every corner held a memory of our journey. As I unpacked boxes and arranged our I couldn't help but smile. This was our life now, our new beginning. I had become someone I was proud of. The woman who had once been broken and lost was now whole, confident, and at peace. I had faced my demons, faced the worst of what life could throw at me, and come out the other side stronger. And with Henry beside me, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together. One afternoon, as I sat in our living room, watching the sunlight dance through the curtains, Henry came in, with a small box in his hand. He knelt in front of me, his eyes filled with warmth. "What's this?" I asked, my voice tinged with curiosity. "It's a little something," he said, opening the box to reveal a necklace. It was simple, but elegant, a silver chain with a small, delicate pendant. A symbol of everything we've been through. A reminder that no matter what, we always find our way back to each other. I felt tears sting my eyes as I took the necklace from him, my heart swelling with emotion. "It's beautiful," I whispered. He smiled, standing up to kiss me gently on the forehead. "You are beautiful, Luna. You always have been." And no matter what comes next, I'll always be here. Right beside you. I placed the necklace around my neck, my fingers trembling slightly as I fastened the clasp. It felt like a promise. A promise to continue moving forward, to continue growing together, and to never let go. The months and years that followed were filled with love, laughter, and new beginnings. Henry and I grew stronger in our relationship, building a family together, filled with the joy that came from shared dreams and mutual respect. We didn't have it all figured out, but we had each other. And that was enough. I looked back on everything that had brought me here, the pain, the heartache, the sacrifices. And while it had been a difficult road, it had led me to this moment. A moment where I was finally living for myself, where I had finally found the peace I had longed for. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about all that had changed. I had finally found my place in the world, not by clinging to the past, but by embracing the future. With Henry, with the life we had built together, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them with love, strength, and the unshakable belief that we could overcome anything. For the first time in my life, I was truly happy. No longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had gained. The future was waiting, and it was ours to create. And I was ready to embrace it, fully and without reservation.